pretty big piece of news to kick off the show today, Sandra. I'm John Roberts in Washington. The report reveals that there were a total of 26 confidential human sources in the crowd that day.
David Spunt is live from the Justice Department. He has got the news for us. David.
Sandra, 3 of those were authorized and tasked by the FBI to be there on January 6, 2021. We're coming up on 4 years since that day of the Capitol riot. This IG report specifically focuses on the FBI's handling of confidential human sources, or as we know them, FBI informants. For years, the outgoing FBI director, Chris Wray, has been pressed on reports of undercover agents. According to this new report, there were no undercover FBI agents. However, there were 3 confidential human sources tasked by the Bureau to be in the crowd on January 6th to specifically watch what the report states is concerns over domestic terrorism. Out of those 3, Sandra and John, 1 entered the Capitol, 2 others entered a restricted area. The report says the FBI did not encourage or authorize any sources to go into the building or a restricted area. In addition to the 3 confidential human sources, the FBI told there were 23 that were there on their own. Now, they had worked with the FBI in the past on other cases, but not specifically on the January 6th rally. Some of them entered a restricted area as well. And what stands out in this report, John and Sandra, none of the confidential human sources that entered the U.S. Capitol or a restricted area were prosecuted by the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. Remember, this is an office that is still arresting nearly 4 years later and prosecuting people with this case. Now, in a response to the Inspector General, the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office says the following. The D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office generally has not charged those individuals whose only crime on January 6, 2021 was to enter the restricted grounds surrounding the Capitol, which has resulted in the office declining to charge hundreds of individuals, and we have treated the confidential human sources as consistent with this approach. Outgoing FBI Director Christopher Wray, who announced that he would be stepping down in the next few weeks yesterday, has been pressed on the FBI's role on January 6. Here's just one clip from last year.
If you are asking whether the violence at the Capitol on January 6 was part of some operation orchestrated by FBI sources and/or agents, the answer is emphatically
You're saying
not.
no?
No.
You're saying no?
Not
Okay.
violence orchestrated by
Let's move
FBI
on.
sources or agents.
Confidential human sources tasked by the FBI are not undercover agents. These are people that belong to groups like, for instance, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and then became paid FBI informants at certain points in time while still being members of their groups. And of course, John and Sandra, others are not part of any group and just decided to show up to the Capitol for whatever reason and still work with the FBI on the side and provide information. And we're, of course, waiting for more information from Capitol Hill to see if the White House has anything, the Department of Justice, the FBI, as this report just breaking now with the Inspector General.
Got it. Appreciate it. David Spunt on that for us. David, thank you.
All right, let's bring in Fox News legal editor Carrie Urban for more on this. I guess the big questions are, what does all of this mean in the grand scheme of things? Also, of the 3 informants that entered the restricted area and the 1 that entered the Capitol, were they just there as observers, or did they actually participate? Did they encourage or foment some sort of rebellious activity?
So a confidential human source is a fancy word phrase for a spy. So we know there were 26 paid spies by the FBI present on the Capitol grounds that day, according to this IG's report. Apparently only 3 of them were authorized to be there. So my question, John, is what were the other 23 doing? Now, they weren't, apparently, according to this report, encouraged or directed to be there, but were they told they couldn't be there? Like, what exactly were they doing? And in fact, some of them, as we learned from this report, entered the restricted area, went into the Capitol. Were they inciting anything? Were they enticing anyone to go with them? I really would love to know what exactly they were saying to the people in the groups that they were part of. I also think it's interesting that this report comes out the day after Chris Wray resigns. It seems to me that he may not have wanted to contend with the questions that, of course, are going to emerge from everything that we're learning today. And the other point I'd like to make is something that David Spunt just raised, where he said that Matthew Graves, who's the U.S. attorney here in Washington, D.C., did not prosecute any of those confidential human sources, spies, that did enter the Capitol that day. And his office, Graves' office, did put out a statement and said that they did not generally prosecute anyone who just went into the Capitol and didn't commit other crimes. My question there is, what does generally mean? How did they make those decisions? And why weren't those particular paid spies part of that group?
The 23 confidential human sources, just reading through this, Carrie, 3 of them entered the Capitol during the riot. An additional 11 entered the restricted area around the Capitol, to your point. Based on what we have learned so far in the details of this report, how would you characterize the findings?
Well, it's very interesting. I think it's especially interesting given that people who were, some of them were just, I think, internet sleuths and the like, have been talking about this for years. And it was only, I think, a couple of years ago that a DOJ attorney in court made the admission that some of these people were present that day. But if you remember, anyone who even raised the possibility that there were paid FBI spies part of what happened, who were part of what happened on January 6th, they were deemed crazy, conspiracy theorists, and the like. Now, look, confidential human sources are a law enforcement tool that are used in all kinds of situations, and we know that some of these people were apparently part of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. But again, why so many? What were they doing? What were the conversations they were having? And if they were, in fact, according to the IG and the FBI, not authorized to be there, then why weren't they prosecuted like everybody else who were prosecuted for similar issues?
On that point, you and I were talking about this off camera. So far, as of August, 1,488 people who were there on January the 6th have been charged with some sort of an offense. 894 of those people have pled guilty to various offenses. 288 pled guilty to felonies. 606 pled guilty to misdemeanors. Yet none of these confidential informants were charged with anything.
Right, so you have to wonder what were the conversations that were happening behind the scenes. And something else that came out in this report was that the confidential human sources, apparently the information they were providing to the FBI was no different than what everyone else was providing. Like, hey, January 6th, there might be some violence, there might be a thing. So there wasn't any, apparently it sounds like there wasn't anything special that they were revealing. And, you know, again, the questions are, what were those confidential human sources who were, quote, not encouraged or directed to be there by the FBI? What were they saying to the other people in their groups? And the reason I keep raising that is because if, in fact, there were conversations occurring like, hey, let's go in there, let's do that, let's do this. You know, entrapment is a defense. You know, if a government agent induces you to commit a crime, a defendant can raise that in the court of law and say, look, I was tracked into doing something. I was enticed into doing something by the government I otherwise wouldn't have done. Now, the government's response based on this report would probably be, well, they weren't authorized by the government to be there at the time. But then, of course, a question for a judge would be, well, could they have been perceived still as an agent of the government, given that they were, you know, this confidential human source? What did the defendant know about them and their role at the time? I just think this report raises more questions, but certainly at a minimum, gives some credibility to people who have been saying this for so many years.
And I assume that we're never going to learn the names or the identities of the confidential informants. So that will leave open the question as to who it was. We got to jump, but there's so much more to talk about regarding
Thank you,
this.
Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our...
All right, welcome everyone, and that is our little introduction. Today is Friday, December 13th, and I want to welcome everyone, and we're going to have a lengthy discussion tonight. Somewhat unusual for a Friday show for us, but hey, that's what it is. I'm not the happiest today, and I'm not the most pleased with some of you, but let me continue, and I'll say hello to everyone, and then we'll get into it. Did you catch the spin, though? Did you catch the spin? Okay, so we're going to say hello to these lovely people in here. Hello to Pam. Say what? 5 Green Acres. Donnie Kuntz. Mino Dino. Dawn Steele. Indy Cindy. Scales of Injustice. Crazy Italian Lady. Sweet Dude Shibby. Nature Loving Lady. Amy. 5 Green Acres. Deputy Dog. Her Baby Daddy. Crazy Girl 1203. V. And Stephanie. Heavy Metal Rehab. Corner Piece, Heather Brown, Tracy Fleetwood, Rebecca Ann, 1965, Bobby Smith, Trail Junkie, a Trial Junkie, Four Pits, Sean Stewart, Nobody Nothing, 1717, Bella's in Wonderland, Laura Dawson, Bonnie, Kay, Don McKenzie, Swade Smith, EWTN, Malibu, Kate Eleanor, welcome from UK, Who's Your Daddy, Woman Doing, Asha Harry, Laura Dawson, did I say hi yet? True Justice, Kathy S., Indy Cindy, I might have already said hi, Indy. So many names. Digital. And 26 dead zombies, dude. Corner Piece, Ninja, Warrior, Assassin. All right, did I catch everyone yet? Shay 7, Royal Wee. All right, tried to catch everyone. If I missed you, I'm sorry. Just put your name down below. Ben Aaron. All right. Icy Cat. Texas Lady 1025. Mama J. Ashes to Ashes. Thank you for becoming a member again. Judy Hathaway. Kayla. True Justice. Ben Aaron. I said hello already. Chris A. Kate U. All right. And we may or may not have caught everyone. Mark Ellis, what's up? What's up, Mark? All right, so everyone who's come in, hello to you. And tonight we have a lot to cover. We're going to be starting tonight with, what's up, Christina? What's up, Christina? Let's see. We're going to grab this one here. Okay. All right, so let's get started. There's no time for messing around. There's too much to cover tonight. Far too much. So confidential informant, right? A confidential informant is a secret source who, through a contact officer, supplies information on criminal activity to the police or law enforcement agent. There are basically two types of police investigation, reactive and proactive. In the former, a crime is reported to the police and an investigation is initiated. In the latter, police uncover or seek out the criminal activity. And that's what we're going to be primarily discussing tonight. Each is concerned with identifying and arresting the perpetrator of a criminal act. In order to identify and obtain evidence against persons involved in criminal activity, the police often use confidential informants, sometimes called criminal informants, and sometimes confidential human sources. Both types of investigative routine require the securing of information that comes from within a criminal subculture, or as Voorhees calls it, the criminal underworld. Okay. Within this criminal subculture, deals are made, plans for the future, as well as past and present crimes are openly discussed, and the general wealth of criminal intelligence is exchanged. The confidential informant, therefore, becomes the ideal tool for penetrating their criminal subculture. Detectives have their own personal cultivated sources, as well as registered confidential informants. Informants have various motives for giving information to the police, and detectives must determine the motivations in order to solicit information successfully. Detectives must keep in mind that they are dealing with people whose motives may be as diverse and devious as the fucking criminals. Okay, and as the criminal activity they wish to uncover. The detective confidential informant relationship is tenuous at best. Murders happen, bad things happen, deaths happen. The secret lies in the ability of the contact officer to control the informant in a manner which is not only realistic, but also legally acceptable. And when it doesn't happen, we get cover-ups, and we'll be getting into that. Since police informants are essential to investigation, expertise must be developed in handling the confidential informants. Okay. So we're going to start off here with this particular graphic. Now, this is interesting because in this graphic, you will see Ray Epps. He is the third row down, third from the left. Okay. Third down, third to the right. Red hat on. Okay. Ray Epps. Okay. So in tandem with this recent Inspector General report, which is a whole PR campaign in and of itself, we're going to discuss this here, which is the August 23rd, 2023 filing, okay, that was recently decided upon. And we'll be discussing this. This was Fox News Network's motion to dismiss, okay, in the matter of Ray Epps versus Fox News. This was recently dismissed by the judge. So this was a successful motion to dismiss, and we'll be going through it and discussing some of the situations discussed in here, okay? We're going to go ahead and skip to page, I believe it's 9. Okay, so let's see where we are. We have to get over here to where the meat starts. But as you see, this is what it is. All right. Summary of the argument. So, remember, this is the motion to dismiss by the defense here. The lawsuit is a direct attack on the First Amendment. Okay, after plaintiff was filmed taking a conspicuous role on January 6th, extorting or exhorting a crowd the day before to go into the Capitol. Okay. Members of Congress and the media asked questions. Why was he not arrested? And was it possible that he or others were undercover federal agents? Well, we know it's possible. And we'll be getting into a discussion afterwards exactly on that. Okay. Fox opinion hosts joined the debate, like many around the world, by doing exactly what the First Amendment protects. They set out key facts that the plaintiff does not dispute, and then asked questions and offered opinions, which is exactly what we do here. They pointed to the lack of an arrest and asked, why is that? And said it was odd, and argued that these were legitimate questions. Now, plaintiff claims that Fox should be liable for defamation because its host implied that he was a federal agent who was encouraging and inciting others to engage in unlawful activities. And that may be the case. It just may be the case. That claim suffers from a host of defects that require dismissal as a matter of law. First, all the challenged statements are opinions protected by the First Amendment. Under the First Amendment, opinions based on disclosed facts are absolutely privileged, no matter how derogatory they are. This rule recognizes that when a speaker sets out the facts supporting a conclusion, A listener may choose to accept or reject it on the basis of an independent evaluation of the facts. The remedy for faulty conclusions based on disclosed facts is more speech, not punishing speech. Here, the allegations and transcripts of Fox shows demonstrate that Fox hosts were presenting protected opinions on disclosed facts that viewers could take or reject. Indeed, in one segment, the plaintiff attacks, but fails to quote in full. The host showed a video of plaintiff and told viewers, once again, you can draw whatever conclusions you like from that video. We have ours, and we shared them with you. Second, plaintiff is a limited purpose public figure, and he fails to allege actual malice. Because plaintiff voluntarily thrust himself into a public controversy by the prominent role he assumed on January 6th. Even giving live interviews that day, he became a limited purpose public figure. Accordingly, he must allege facts showing actual malice, i.e., that Fox speakers knew their statements were false or had substantial awareness that they were probably false. The complaint fails to allege any such acts. Third, both Utah and New York law independently require pleading facts to satisfy a malice standard, and plaintiff fails to meet those state law requirements for the same reasons. Fourth, plaintiff's claims are largely time barred. Under the 1-year statute of limitations, plaintiff can bring claims only for statements after July 10, 2022. Broadcast before that date cannot give rise to a claim. And plaintiff cannot claim damages from the loss of his home and business in Arizona, which were complete in May 2022 outside the limitations period. Plaintiff's false light claim is foreclosed by the First Amendment principles and is also largely time barred under the same year of 1-year statute of limitations. Okay, so in that particular paragraph there, they are arguing the statute of limitations had expired for this claim. Let's continue. Statement of facts. Plaintiff voluntarily takes a prominent public role on January 6th, and this is an important thing. Okay, this is important for public criticism of prominent public figures. And we're going to see this in some other cases. On January 4, 2021, plaintiff flew across the country. Remember, plaintiff is Ray Epps. Okay, tonight we're discussing Ray Epps in the first half of the show. Ray Epps flew across the country from Arizona to attend the Stop the Steal rally and draw attention to the message supporting President Trump. Well, we don't necessarily believe that. Okay. On January 5th, he was live streamed on the internet telling a large crowd, I'm probably going to go to jail for this. Tomorrow, we need to go into the Capitol. Members of the crowd, apparently suspecting that he was a federal agent, spontaneously chanted, "Fed, Fed, Fed." Later, plaintiff told one of the leaders in the crowd, we're here to storm the Capitol. I'm not kidding. That person responded, we're here to storm the Capitol. Hell yeah. On January 6th, plaintiff took a leading role, directing the crowd at the rally to the Capitol. In one video, he tells the crowd, we are going to the Capitol where our problems are. It's that direction. Please spread the word. Along the way, he gave a TV interview. At the Capitol, Ray Epps went to the front of the crowd along a police barricade that became one of the initial breach points. And you will soon learn that him, along with a bunch of other agent provocateurs who we believe to be FBI agents and Antifa. He was captured on video speaking into the ear of Ryan Samsel, and moments later, Samsel and others pushed the barricade down, toppling it over an officer. Plaintiff immediately followed through the breach. As he left the Capitol, he texted his nephew, quote, "I was in the front with a few others. I also orchestrated it." Do I need to replay that for you or reread it? "I was in the front with a few others. I also orchestrated it." Select committee to investigate the January 6th attack, which we know was the cover-up committee, and you'll be learning that soon in the next year. Interview of Ray Epps at 60, January 21st, 2022. Okay. B, the FBI publicly seeks plaintiff, then stops. Okay, when the FBI began trying to identify those who instigated the violence on January 6th, it created a web page titled Most Wanted. Let me show you that again. Okay. Prominently placed plaintiff's photo on it. Third row down, third photo over. The FBI removed photos as people were arrested, but removed Ray Epps' photo around July 2021 without making an arrest. So the question is, why would they remove Ray Epps' photo here, third down, third over, as being the only one removed from this list without being arrested? Okay? C, plaintiff's public role on January 6th becomes subject of intense interest from Congress and the media. Yes, believe me, it took an act of Congress for us to get just a glimmer into this situation. What do you think it's going to take for Delphi? Plaintiff's public role, as videos of plaintiff circulated online, that means videos of Ray Epps at January 5th and 6th, media and government officials took interest. In June 2021, the New York Times capped a 6-month investigation, quote unquote, with a video entitled Day of Rage that featured plaintiff Ray Epps. The Times reported, for some, storming the Capitol was part of the plan all along. Remember, Ray Epps said, "I orchestrated it." And showed plaintiff Ray Epps telling a crowd that they need to go into the Capitol. It continued, some make calls to storm the Capitol even before Trump speaks. And showed the plaintiff telling a crowd, "We are going to go to the Capitol where our problems are. It's that direction." It also stated that Samsel pushing down the barricade seconds after plaintiff spoke to him was when the protest turned violent. Remember, "I orchestrated it," says Ray Epps. Plaintiff was also the focus of 2 news articles in Arizona's largest newspaper. On October 21st, 2021, Representative Massey played videos of Ray Epps on January 5th and 6th in a hearing and asked Attorney General whether there were federal agents in the crowd on those days. Attorney General Merrick Garland declined to answer. Well, now we know the answer is yes, 26 to be exact. 26 federal agents, ladies and gentlemen. 4 days later, Revolver News claimed that plaintiff Ray Epps was a Fed-protected provocateur, which may be fact. Congressman Matt Gaetz argued on his podcast that this was the biggest story in the world right now, and noted that members of Congress and journalists were asking, was the FBI involved in animating criminal activity on January 6th? And now we know the answer is yes. Gaetz pointed out that agents were on tape trying to insert an informant into the Oath Keepers, of which plaintiff Ray Epps had been a member. On January 11th, 2022, Senator Ted Cruz asked an FBI official whether any FBI agents or informants participated in January 6th, pointed to still shots of plaintiff Ray Epps, and asked whether Ray Epps was a Fed. The official, of course, declined to answer. They will always decline to answer. Why? Because answering would have to be in the affirmative if it's affirmative. And if they say no, it's perjury. So what do? They decline to answer. It's called Fed 101. You always decline to answer. If you watch any of the congressional hearings, you'll quickly learn that. That's what they do. According to 60 Minutes, the FBI refused to comment on plaintiff Ray Epps for almost 2 years, until April 2023. D, plaintiff tells his story nationally through the January 6th cover-up committee. On January 21st, 2022, plaintiff testified before the January 6th cover-up committee that he had not been working for the government on January 6th. The committee amplified his message in attempting to cover up his role by tweeting out his denial to all its followers. And we'll be learning more about that in the next year. Fox News, Fox hosts also discussed the public controversy around plaintiff. Fox hosts also joined the public debate about plaintiff's prominent role on January 6th. The first challenged mention of plaintiff Ray Epps on Fox was on October 25th, 2021. After a New York Times special feature and after congressional inquiries about Mr. Ray Epps. As quoted in the complaint, Tucker Carlson and/or his guests described the known and undisputed facts about plaintiff Ray Epps. They then asked questions and speculated about answers. One night, Mr. Carlson ended his show asking why Epps was never charged or arrested or sent to jail. And promised his audience an investigation. Another time, Mr. Carlson said, the question is, did Ray Epps work or have any contact with any government agency? And he followed up, we don't know, but I'm sure we'll be finding out in the next year or two. He also pointed out that plaintiff Ray Epps had not been charged and asked, why is that? And gave his view that at this point, it's pretty obvious why that is. Similarly, he argued, it's a legitimate question. Why won't they answer it? Another opinion host similarly questioned why Epps was removed from the FBI list and not arrested. That's this one here, remember? Why was he the only one removed from this list without being arrested? Another asked, what about Epps? Did he work for the FBI? The New York Times and 60 Minutes provide a platform for plaintiff's story. On July 13, 2022, the New York Times published a new feature about plaintiff Ray Epps declaring that he was the target of a conspiracy theory. Well, we know this is an orchestrated mass media PR campaign. The story presented plaintiff Ray Epps' account of his role on January 6, including that he was not working for the government. On April 21st, 2023, 60 Minutes, another mass media PR hit piece, devoted 1/3 of its broadcast to plaintiff Ray Epps' story. On national television, plaintiff Ray Epps gave his account. Oh, the violins were sounding, ladies and gentlemen, the world's smallest violins, explaining that he was not working for the government, quote unquote. Plaintiff sues. On July 10, 2023, plaintiff Ray Epps sued Fox, alleging defamation and false light based on the claimed implication that plaintiff, quote, was a federal agent who was encouraging and inciting others to engage in unlawful activities. As damages, he points to the loss of his home and business as of May 2022, when he left Arizona more than 1 year before he filed suit. Legal standard. As a complaint must contain sufficient factual matter accepted as true to state a claim to relief that is plausible on its face. Choice of law. The court need not rule on choice of law now because the complaint fails under either the law of plaintiff's domicile, Utah, or law of Fox's headquarters and the place where the statements were made, New York. Argument. Plaintiff fails to state a claim for defamation. This lawsuit attacks core First Amendment protected speech, in which Fox Opinion host asked questions, looked for answers, and provided commentary and opinion on widely reported and undisputed facts about plaintiff Ray Epps' prominent role in one of the biggest public controversies in fucking political history. The January 6th storming of the Capitol by federal agents and Antifa. Plaintiff's claims run into the bedrock rule that under the First Amendment, opinions based on disclosed facts are absolutely privileged, no matter how derogatory they are. And plaintiff also fails to plead actual malice, that is, that Fox hosts subjectively knew their statements were false or seriously doubted their truth. Under both Utah and New York law, defamation requires, among other things, a provably false statement of fact, not opinion, made with the requisite degree of fault, which here is actual malice because plaintiff Ray Epps is a limited purpose public figure. The complaint fails on both requirements and is mostly time barred as well. Plaintiff's defamation claims fail because the challenge statements are constitutionally protected opinions, not provably false statements of fact. Plaintiff's defamation claim fails because the challenge statements all convey opinions, not facts. Under the First Amendment, a statement that, quote, does not contain a provably false factual connotation will receive full constitutional protection, and statements that cannot reasonably be interpreted as stating actual facts about an individual, quote, are protected. Utah and New York law incorporate the same or greater protections. The question whether a statement constitutes constitutionally protected opinion or unprotected fact is an issue that must be decided by the court, and if the issue is close, a court should err on the side of non-accountability. Whether a statement is opinion turns on one, whether it has precise meaning, two, whether it can be objectively verified as true or false, or three, the full context of the statement, and four, the broader context in which the statement is made. All factors confirm the statements here are opinions. One, the statements did not have precise meaning or convey objectively verifiable facts. Virtually all of the challenge statements are not assertions of verifiable fact because they consist of a Fox Opinion host or guest setting out facts about plaintiff Ray Epps and one, asking questions, or two, providing a subjective opinion that the facts are strange or odd and warrant further investigation. For example, Tucker Carlson asked why Epps was never charged or arrested or sent to jail, and noted that, quote, he's never been charged. Why is that? And he gave his view that the question is, did Ray Epps work or have any contact with any government agency, which is a valid question. Another host questioned why Epps was removed from the FBI list and has not been arrested, and questioned why Epps was not charged with conspiracy, which is another valid question. Asking such questions, however, does not assert a precise meaning or imply provable facts. it conveys an opinion that the facts raise questions deserving investigation. In fact, Fox Opinion host squarely asserted their goal was to show that there were real questions that should be answered. Mr. Carlson argued that this is not a conspiracy theory. It's a legitimate question. Why won't they answer it? And he said, I don't think anyone watching should feel embarrassed to ask those questions or allow anyone to bark you into silence by calling you a conspiracy nut. Commentary asserting that facts deserve serious scrutiny and raising questions and urging readers to investigate is a classic form of opinion. Classic. It lies at the heart of protected commentary on issues of public concern. Inviting the public to ask questions rather than a liable is the paradigm of a properly functioning press. Similarly, statements arguing that facts were very odd and that something very strange is going on with Ray Epps and that the Ray Epps thing isn't organic are protected opinions. Statements characterizing facts as suspicious are expressions of opinion that cannot support a claim of defamation. 2, even if the challenge statements conveyed a factual implication, context confirms that they are opinions based on fully disclosed facts. Even if the challenge statements implied the plaintiff was working for the government, that context confirms they were still protected opinion. The governing rule here is that, quote, under the First Amendment, opinions based on disclosed facts are, quote, absolutely privileged, no matter how derogatory they are. They are, quote, close quotation. Pure opinion is a statement of opinion accompanied by a recitation of the facts upon which it is based. A simple expression of opinion based on disclosed or assumed non-defamatory facts is not itself sufficient for an action of defamation, no matter how unjustified or unreasonable the opinion may be or how derogatory it is. This rule reflects the principle that if disclosed facts are true and the opinion is defamatory, a listener may choose to accept or reject that opinion on the basis of an independent evaluation of facts. When an author outlines the facts available to him, thus making it clear that the challenge statements represent his own interpretation of the facts and leaving the reader to draw his own conclusions, those statements are generally protected by the First Amendment. That principle applies to all challenge statements, which were all based on disclosed facts. The complaint quotes at length 2 segments from Tucker Carlson tonight that show the typical pattern. The host or guest detail facts, key facts. 1, are the key facts that plaintiff Ray Epps was on video urging a crowd to go into the Capitol. He was at the front of the crowd at a barricade right before it was breached. He was on the FBI's wanted poster and then removed. Unlike others, he had not been charged. Then the host or guest offers questions or commentary based on the facts. The same format is apparent in other challenged statements. Thus, plaintiff asserts, Mr. Carlson ended his show asking why Ray Epps was never charged or arrested or sent to jail. And another host said that it was very odd that plaintiff's photo was taken off the FBI list. Such statements are plainly commentary on disclosed and undisputed facts. Plaintiff does not claim that the facts recited in the challenge statements were false and defamatory in themselves. To the contrary, he admits all the key facts about his involvement on January 5th and on January 6th. Nor does he allege that any statement implied undisclosed facts. That is critical because an opinion can be defamatory only if it implies that it is based on undisclosed facts. Far from hinting that they knew more, Fox hosts were making the point that the known facts did not provide satisfactory answers. It does not matter that the implication plaintiff derives from the challenge statements that he was working for the FBI is a factual point that could be proved true or false. As the restatement explains, where a speaker discloses the facts on which he relies, even a factual conclusion, such as that the person is an alcoholic, is protected opinion. Restatement of torts assertion that a plaintiff lied about an incident was opinion on disclosed facts. Because the facts are widely known and Fox hosts discussed them repeatedly, hosts did not need to repeat all the facts in every single segment for this principle to apply. Statement is opinion when the maker of the statement does not spell out the alleged facts on which the opinion is based, but both parties to the communication know the facts or assume their existence. We acknowledge that the defendant's statement is capable of being proved or disproved, but we nevertheless hold that when viewed in context, it is clearly an opinion. Conclusion that facts pointed to a swimmer using performance-enhancing drugs was protected opinion, which is Hosew versus Barrett, okay, 2016. Similarly here, even if Fox hosts implied a factual conclusion about plaintiff Ray Epps, it reflected only their interpretations based on disclosed facts. A speaker can immunize his statement from defamation liability by fully disclosing the non-defamatory facts on which his opinion is based. A pure opinion does not lose its protected status merely because it's ostensibly cast in factual form. It is especially clear that any conclusions were only opinions because the statements were replete with cautionary language that signal opinion and interpretation. The format of the segments involved setting out facts and raising queries on those facts, which indicated that the issues surrounding Ray Epps presented a puzzle to unravel, which was not a matter on which they were definitive answers. The opinion host argued that further inquiry was needed precisely because officials would not ask or answer key questions. It's a legitimate question. Why won't they answer it? Calling for further investigation signals that a speaker's conclusions are a theory or conjecture, not established fact. Example, no one in the January 6th committee has explained whether Ray Epps was in communication with any U.S. government agency. Why won't they just tell us that? We will keep asking questions because we think it's very obvious and an important question. And I agree, it is still an important question. All right. Fox hosts also acknowledged that they did not have definitive answers. Mr. Carlson asked, did Ray Epps work or have any contact with any government agency? And he answered, we don't know. The official silence and lack of clear answers were part of the point of his commentary. In one segment, after showing video of plaintiff Ray Epps, Mr. Carlson squarely stated, once again, you can draw whatever conclusions you like from that video. We have ours, and we've shared them with you. Fox opinion hosts were clearly providing their interpretations that listeners could accept or reject based on their own assessment of fully disclosed facts. First Amendment protection for such commentary is essential for our democracy. If commentators could be liable in defamation anytime they provided a theory to explain a set of facts, debate on public matters would be stifled. Protection for such commentary is based on the recognition that, quote, an opinion which is unfounded reveals its lack of merit when the opinion holder discloses the factual basis for the idea. It reflects the foundational First Amendment principle that the remedy for erroneous ideas is more speech, not the punishing of speech. Broader context also confirms the challenge statements are opinion. Finally, the broader context confirms the statements are opinion because they all appeared on commentary talk shows where audiences expect pitched commentary. Okay? Settings such as editorial pages argue strongly in favor of finding the statements to be protected opinion. A blog is a form of media known for containing personal opinion and commentary. That context confirms that audiences would understand the statements as opinion and speculation, not implied assertions of objective fact. Same here. Same here on this channel at all times. B, plaintiff fails to allege facts plausibly suggesting actual malice. The defamation claims also fail because plaintiff Ray Epps is a limited purpose public figure, but he fails to allege actual malice. The famously daunting standard. Is a bulwark protecting free speech, and that is Ta versus Glob Witness Publications, Inc., 2021. It requires alleging facts showing that Fox hosts subjectively knew that their statements were false or had serious doubts about their truth. The complaint does not come close to meeting the standard. 1, plaintiff is a limited purpose public figure. Limited purpose public figure status is a question of law for the court. That requires considering 1, whether the alleged defamation involves a public controversy, and 2, the nature and extent of plaintiff's involvement in that controversy. Let me repeat that again because this is very important for all of us. Limited public figure or limited purpose public figure status is a question of law for the court that requires considering 1, whether the alleged defamation involves a public controversy, and 2, the nature and extent of plaintiff's involvement in that controversy. The January 6th storming of the Capitol and debates about the origins of its violence qualify as a public controversy. They present, quote, a real dispute, the outcome of which affects the general public. As for plaintiff's involvement, when an individual undertakes a course of conduct that invites attention related to public controversy, he may be deemed a public figure. Plaintiff easily crossed that line as he voluntarily thrust himself into the vortex of the dispute. He flew across the country to join in this event, which was designed to draw attention to the protesters' message. He was filmed urging the others to go into the Capitol, even saying he was probably going to go to jail. The next day on video, he urged protesters to march on the Capitol and along the way gave a television interview. He went to the front of the crowd at a police barricade and was filmed there just before it was breached. As I mentioned, with other federal agents and Antifa. He went through the breach and placed himself at the front of the crowd again at the next police line. He admitted that he helped orchestrate the storming of the Capitol. He also gave another interview. Such open participation in notorious activities easily makes the plaintiff a limited purpose public figure. Participating in a riot made the plaintiff a public figure in Curtis Pub 388 US at 154 to 55. Voluntary connection with motorcycle gangs is sufficient for a limited purpose public figure, according to Marcone 754 F2D at 1083 and 1086. Voluntary connection with motorcycle gangs. Wow, isn't that rich? Isn't that rich? I think that might come into play with Delphi. Plaintiff also was the subject of intense attention. Before the first alleged mention of him on Fox on October 25th, 2021, he was featured in the New York Times Day of Rage video, a political hit piece. He was the subject of 2 stories in Arizona's largest newspaper and an article on daily costs. He was also the subject of questions for the Attorney General in a congressional hearing. Yes, that's Merrick Garland in a congressional hearing, and had been on the FBI Most Wanted webpage for 6 months. Limited purpose public figure status for plaintiff is also foursquare within or with the twin rationales in Gertz. The more important factor is assumption of risk. Plaintiff Ray Epps voluntarily put himself in a position of greater public scrutiny by his conspicuous participation on January 6th. More important factor is whether plaintiff voluntarily assumed the risk of attracting public attention. In addition, although not required, plaintiff had access to the channels of effective communication to respond to any commentary about him. Noting that media access is only a factor in the public figure analysis and significant involvement in public controversy, more important. Plaintiff was interviewed twice on January 6th and later interviewed by both 60 Minutes and the New York Times. He also had the compounded media access that came from telling his story to the January 6th cover-up committee and having the committee endorse it and tweet it out, which produced multiple further stories in the press. And there's a huge controversy about that now because of the voluminous amount of deletion that has happened with that data, just like has happened in the investigation in Delphi. Plaintiff fails to allege any facts plausibly suggesting actual malice. Plaintiff must allege facts to support an inference of actual malice. That requires facts suggesting Fox hosts acted with knowledge that their statements were false or with reckless disregard of whether they were false or not. Reckless disregard is a subjective standard that requires a showing of a high degree of awareness of probable falsity. It is not measured by whether a reasonably prudent man would have published or would have investigated before publishing. In fact, failure to investigate and even an extreme departure from professional standards is not enough for actual malice. Instead, a plaintiff must plead facts indicating that the defendant, in fact, entertains serious doubts as to the truth of his publication. This complaint fails to allege any facts suggesting such subjective knowledge or falsity. First, claims that Fox had an economic motive and sought to appease viewers are irrelevant. Case law resoundingly rejects the proposition that a motive to disparage someone is evidence of actual malice. An allegation of desire to increase profits are also insufficient. Conclusory assertions about motive provide no facts suggesting knowledge of falsity. Second, claims that Fox sought guests to support a preconceived storyline also fall short. Evidence that an investigation was designed to confirm a hostile premise rather than to find the truth does not establish malice. A pre-existing agenda, even one which may be noxious to some minds, is not indicative of actual malice. In any event, comments from one potential guest rejecting the idea that the FBI infiltrated the Proud Boys gave no information about plaintiff who had been an oath keeper, especially when DHS had attempted to infiltrate oath keepers. Moreover, Fox hosts pursued investigative efforts, including seeking comment from officials and gaining exclusive access to congressional video of January 6th to get all the facts, which belie any claim of actual malice. Investigating allegations is evidence that the publisher neither believed the allegations to be false nor willfully blinded himself to the truth. Hello, do you understand that? Actually attempting to get to the bottom of the truth of a situation does not indicate or prove evidence that the publisher believes the allegations to be false or willfully blinded him or herself to the truth. Thirdly, Ray Epps claims that Fox purposely avoided the truth. But self-serving denials are so commonplace that the press need not accept them. They hardly alert the conscientious reporter to the likelihood of error. Nor was Fox required to accept the January 6th committee's view. Do you understand that? Nor was Fox obligated or required to accept the January 6th political committee hit piece opinion, which repeated the plaintiff's own denial. Plaintiff hopefully fails to point to any evidence that could readily be verified, as would be required to give Fox hosts reasons to doubt their commentary. Fourth, plaintiff fares no better asserting that Fox used unreliable sources. Courts have consistently held that reliance on tainted or troubled sources does not alone establish actual malice. Also, the complaint does not even allege facts showing Beatty was a source. Rather, he provided commentary on known facts about plaintiff. Okay. Fifth, plaintiff also cannot allege actual malice by asserting that the idea of federal informants pushing the crowds toward violence is inherently improbable. Let's reread that. Let's reread that. All right, let's reread that. Plaintiff cannot allege actual malice by asserting that the idea of federal informants pushing the crowd towards violence is inherently improbable. Just last year, the prosecution for a conspiracy to kidnap the governor of Michigan fell apart because 2 alleged conspirators were FBI sources. And now we know it's 12. It's 12. Let's get back to that. Just last year, the prosecution for a conspiracy to kidnap the governor of Michigan fell apart because 12 alleged conspirators were FBI informants who were pushing the plan. The First Amendment protects commentators speculating on disclosed facts about similar conduct here. If one could plead actual malice by simply labeling a theory about government misconduct improbable, the actual malice standard would not provide much protection for those critiquing government actors. That is why, quote, there is no inherent improbability exception that replaces the requirement that plaintiff plead facts showing actual malice. 6, the absence of any retraction is not evidence of intent at the time of publication and is not in itself enough to nudge an allegation of actual malice from conceivable to plausible. C, plaintiff fails to plead malice adequately under state law. The complainant also fails requirements to allege malice under New York and Utah law. Under New York law, because this case involves the exercise of, quote, the right of free speech in connection with an issue of public interest, close quotation, the First Amendment actual malice standard applies. Under Utah law, the challenge statements are privileged under UT Code 4525 as television broadcast of a, quote, program for discussion of any controversial or other subjects under Utah Code 4523 and 5 as publications made for the public benefit, and 3 under the common law public interest privilege. To overcome these privileges, plaintiff must allege common law malice which requires showing ill will that defendant did not honestly believe his statements to be true. The complaint fails to allege any fact showing ill will, and the honest belief standard is equivalent to actual malice. Which the complaint fails to satisfy for the reasons explained above. B, claims based on statements made before July 10, 2022 are time barred. Here we just get into the good old statute of limitations. Any claim based on statements before July 10, 2022 are time barred. Okay, so I'll skip over that. That's obvious. And E, the complaint fails to allege facts under which Fox could be liable for statements made on third-party redacted podcast. Statements by Mr. Carlson on the podcast Redacted, which is not a Fox product, cannot support a claim. Fox cannot be liable for those statements unless Mr. Carlson was acting within the scope of his employment. But the complaint does not allege any facts suggesting that the appearance was of the general kind Mr. Carlson is employed to perform, or that it occurred within the hours of Mr. Carlson's work and ordinary spatial boundaries of his employment, or that it was motivated, at least in part, by the purpose of serving his employer's interest. The conclusory allegation that Mr. Carlson was at all relevant times an agent of Fox is insufficient. And the mere fact that Mr. Carlson spoke about the work he did at Fox does not indicate that he was then acting within the scope of his employment. Okay, the false light claims fail for the same reasons. Number 2 here. Plaintiff's false light claim fails for similar reasons. First, the same First Amendment restrictions apply to false light. The claim fails because the challenged statements are all protected opinions and plaintiff failed to allege actual malice. Second, the claim is mostly time barred, where here, a false light is tied to the same operative facts as defamation claim. The 1-year limitation period applies to both. Third, plaintiff's false light claim fails because he has not pled special damages. Failure to adequately plead special damages would be enough by itself to affirm dismissal of false light claims. Also, the only special damages in the complaint are plaintiff's loss of his home and business in Arizona. But plaintiff cannot rely on that because those damages were complete in May 2022 when he left Arizona. And remember, we have a statute of limitations here. Thus, plaintiff has not pled special damages that can be connected to any claim within the limitation period, and his false light claims fail. Conclusion, the complaint should be dismissed for failure to state a claim. And this was granted. Okay, this absolutely was granted. It's a done deal. It's a done deal. So let's get into something else here, because at the opening, I played for you a brief news segment on the recent news, which was the reporting of the release of a report here by the Department of Justice Inspector General. Okay, a review of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's handling of its confidential human sources and intelligence collections efforts in the lead up to January 6th. Okay, so we're going to skip ahead to page 9, or maybe it's page 8. I may be messing up here. There we go, page 8. Now, I'd like you to keep in mind before we get into this right here, this is public relations, okay? Don't get it twisted, okay? What you're about to hear is the spin. Remember at the opening of the prior segment that I played for you, it started with the spin, okay? Before the commentator gave her opinion, which was very pertinent, they reported that what the reporting was, which was this we're going to read now. And this here is the spin. This is the FBI spinning the involvement of their 26 informants on January 6th, okay? And as I've promised you, in the next year or two, we will be learning more of this. This entire thing is about to crumble in front of the eyes of the people in the next years. Okay, you're going to learn about all the federal involvement in January 6th, including these 26, okay, because we're going to read now what the official statement after all this time. Remember, as I mentioned, it took an act of Congress to get this admission, because for years, Congress consistently pressed on this issue. We wanted answers, is what they said. We want answers to Merrick Garland and to others. We demand answers. We demand answers. We demand answers. And what did they get every single time? No comment. No comment. Can't comment. Can't comment. So what happens? Christopher Wray resigns as this is released. Okay, do you get the timing? Christopher Wray announces his resignation as this Inspector General report is released. Okay, there's no coincidence. And it's no coincidence in the timing of this release. But keep in mind, this right here is the cover. Okay, this is the cover story. So don't get it twisted. This is not a statement of fact. These are allegations of fact by the FBI trying to cover its own ass. Okay, summary of findings. Again, let me go back and show you what this is. A review of the FBI's handling of confidential human sources or informants for January 6th. Okay, and this is the cover story, as I've mentioned. The FBI did not have primary responsibility for intelligence collection or event security on January 6th. Rather, the USCP, that's Capitol Police, the Metropolitan PD, and the USPP were generally responsible for security, operations, crowd control, and visitor protection in advance of protests and other demonstrations in and around the Capitol. Our review found that despite playing only a supporting role, the FBI recognized the potential for violence and took significant and appropriate steps to prepare for this supporting role, including attempting to identify known domestic terrorism suspects who plan to travel to D.C. for the January 6th electoral certification, standing up a national command post, as well as a full FBI Washington field office command post to coordinate the sharing of intelligence between law enforcement agencies on January 6th, and preparing additional tactical assets to be ready to be deployed at the request of local authorities. You mean setting up the agent provocateurs? Indeed, after the Capitol was breached by rioters, agent provocateurs and Antifa dressed as Trump supporters, the FBI was in a position to deploy tactical assets to help clear the Capitol of protesters and to help the USCP, Capitol Police, secure the perimeter around the Capitol complex. The FBI told Congress that its posture for January 6th preparations was extraordinary, and we found that the FBI effectively carried out its tactical support function on January 6th. While the FBI undertook significant efforts to identify domestic terrorism suspects or subjects who planned to travel to the Capitol region on January 6th and prepared to support its law enforcement partners on January 6th if needed, we also determined that the FBI did not take a step that could have helped the FBI and its law enforcement partners with their preparations in advance of January 6th. Specifically, the FBI did not canvass its field offices in advance of January 6, 2021, to identify any intelligence, including CHS reporting, about potential threats to the January 6th electoral certification. Several FBI officials told the OIG that it is common practice for the FBI to ask field offices to canvass their sources for information in advance of a large event, such as the inauguration, the Super Bowl, or other events with significant attendance, and to report that information to the requesting field office, which in this instance would have been the WFO, Washington Field Office. FBI Deputy Director Paul Abbate, who was the Associate Deputy Director at the time, described the lack of canvas prior to January 6 as a basic step that was missed, and told the OIG that he would have expected a formal canvassing of sources to have occurred through the issuance of an intelligence collection product, because it would have been the most thorough approach to understanding the threat picture prior to January 6. We determined that, despite some discussions about issuing formal intelligence collection products specific to both the January 6th electoral certification and the January 20th inauguration, the FBI only issued an intelligence collection product for the inauguration. Yeah, well, what you should have done is not allowed the deep state actors to coordinate a provocation program. False flag. That would have been helpful, and January 6th would have never happened. We found no evidence in the materials we reviewed or testimony we received showing or suggesting that the FBI had undercover employees in the various protest crowds or at the Capitol on January 6th. Well, we're about to find out that that's not true. We reviewed the documented CHS reporting that the FBI had prior to the riot and breach of the Capitol on January 6, 2021. We determined that 3 confidential human sources or informants, 3 informants, had been tasked by the FBI field offices in the days leading up to January 6 with the required approval of the WFO, the Washington Field Office, to travel to D.C. for the events of January 6 to report on domestic terrorism suspects or subjects who were possibly attending the event. Specifically, one FBI field office tasked an informant to travel to D.C. to report on the activities of a predicated domestic terrorism subject who was separately planning to travel to D.C. for the January 6 electoral certification. A second FBI field office tasked a confidential informant to travel to D.C. to potentially report on 2 domestic terrorism subjects from another FBI field office who were planning to travel to D.C. for the events of January 6, and a third who had informed their handling agent that they intended to travel to D.C. on their own initiative for the events of January 6, was similarly tasked by their field office to potentially report on 2 domestic terrorism subjects for their field offices who were planning to travel to D.C. on the events of for the events of January 6. Our review concluded that none of these 3 FBI informants were authorized to enter the Capitol or a restricted area or to otherwise break the law on January 6, nor was any CHS directed by the FBI to encourage others to commit illegal acts on January 6. Is that your official story? And did any of the 26 enter the Capitol or instigate violence? I bet you they did. In addition to these 3, we found that 23 other FBI informants were in D.C. on January 6th in connection with the events planned on January 6th. None of these FBI informants were authorized to enter the Capitol or a restricted area or to otherwise break the law on January 6th, nor was any informant directed by the FBI to encourage others to commit illegal acts on January 6th. Is that the statement of fact? Because you know this will be investigated. The next 4 years, investigators are going to be so down your throats, you're not going to be able to breathe. You better hope every word in this document is true. We determined that of the 26 informants who were in D.C. on January 6 in connection with the events of January 6, 4 entered the Capitol during the riot. An additional 13 entered the restricted area around the Capitol. Oh, wow. What is that, 17? 17. Which was a security perimeter established in preparation for the January 6th certification, and 9 neither entered a restricted area nor entered the Capitol or otherwise engaged in any illegal activity. None of the informants who entered the Capitol or restricted area have been prosecuted to date. Okay, so 17 entered and none have been prosecuted. Because why would you ever prosecute an FBI confidential informant? The Washington field office did not know that a total of 26 informants would be in D.C. for the events of January 6th because only Ford field offices had informed the Washington field office or FBI headquarters that confidential informants under the relevant field office's jurisdiction, 5 informants in total, would be traveling to D.C. on 6th. So you informed them that 5 would be traveling, but 26 did. Interesting. The Office of Inspector General determined that many of these 26 informants had provided information relevant to the January 6th electoral certification before the event, and that a few informants also provided information about the riot as it occurred. I bet they did. Was Ray Epps one of them? In addition, FBI field offices collected informant reporting relevant to the January 6th electoral certification from informants who did not travel to D.C. for the event. Among the information informants provided to their handling agents was the following. A confidential human source was in contact with leadership for the Oath Keepers. Extremist members of the Oath Keepers or groups may become involved in unplanned violent activity on January 6th, The Oath Keepers contingent headed to D.C. 200 plus strong. Travel plans discussed by Proud Boys. An individual purporting to be the leader of a group that had 500 people willing to storm the Capitol building in Washington on January 6th. Oh, yeah. Was that Antifa? And a confidential human source indicated they had concerns for the safety of members of Congress. The information was no more specific than and was consistent with other sources of information that the FBI and its Washington field office had received about the potential for violence on January 6th, including from other sources of tips to the FBI had received and from social media. Thus, although the Washington field office and domestic terrorism operations section at FBI headquarters did not direct field offices to canvass their confidential human sources in advance of January 6th, our review of documented confidential human sources reporting in FBI field offices as of January 6th did not identify any potentially critical evidence related to a possible attack on the Capitol on January 6th that had not been provided to law enforcement stakeholders prior to January 6th, because the agent provocateurs who started the violence on January 6th at the front of the line were probably your people. There was no plan for violence other than your plan for violence. Nonetheless, as numerous FBI officials told us, confidential human sources information can be used to corroborate other sources of reporting to help the FBI develop as complete an understanding as possible of the threat picture in advance of an event like the January 6th electoral certification, and the FBI therefore should have canvassed its field offices for any relevant CHS information in advance of January 6th. We make one recommendation to the FBI to address the issues we identified in our review. Okay, so I get it. I get it. So this is called straw man, because you don't want to address the fact that your 26 feds stormed the Capitol. 9 of them waited outside. You don't want to address that. So you're going to deflect and take responsibility for not canvassing the field offices and make that the issue. That's very interesting. That's very interesting. Okay, there's some more pages I need to get to. And let's see if I can even find those pages. Let's see. And there's a reason we're discussing FBI criminal informants. Jeez, man, this is difficult to navigate. All right, let's go to this is page 76. Oh, maybe it's not. Oh, it's 80. Okay, so sorry about that. In addition, a pre-January 6 canvass would have resulted in field offices engaging with their informants, providing field offices with an opportunity to learn from the approximately 24 informants about their plans to be in Washington on January 6th, and then pass on whatever they learned to Washington field office. Although the Washington field office and DTOS did not direct field offices to canvass their confidential human sources in advance of January 6th, our review of documented informant reporting in FBI field offices as of January 6th did not identify any potentially critical intelligence related to a possible attack. So you see what I'm saying here? There was no intelligence about a possible attack, other than the fact that you had 26 informants. Our investigation determined there were a total of 26 FBI informants from a wide range of FBI field offices in DC on January 6 in connection with the event of January 6. In addition, we learned that 3 informants were in DC, but not in attendance of any January 6 events. So that brings you to 29. Our review found that no FBI informant was authorized to enter the Capitol or a restricted area or otherwise break the law, nor was any informant directed by the FBI to encourage others to commit illegal acts on January 6th. Of the 26 informants who were in DC for the events of January 6th, the records we reviewed showed that 4 informants entered the Capitol on January 6th. 13 informants entered the restricted area, and 9 informants attended January 6th but did not enter the Capitol or a restricted area. Okay? As noted previously, none of the informants that entered the Capitol or a restricted area on January 6th has been prosecuted to date. After reviewing a draft of this report, the DC U.S. Attorney's Office generally responded to the OIG and says, the U.S. Attorney's Office does not generally charge those individuals whose only crime on January 6th was to enter restricted grounds surrounding the Capitol, which has resulted in the office declining to charge hundreds of individuals. And we have treated the CHS or informants consistent with this approach. Well, tell me this. How is it that you've have had people in jail for years now, not one fed? See, not one fed. So you see what this is? It's a whole bunch of passing of the buck or covering of the asses. None of these. Okay, let's go into this one. I want to go into this one. Of the remaining 23 confidential human sources, informants who traveled to DC in connection with the events of January 6th, we determined that the informants did so on their own initiative. We further found that 13 of these 23 notified their handling agent in advance about their planned travel, and 10 did not. And that none of the 23 were authorized to engage in illegal activity. They also allege that the 3 who did enter the Capitol were not authorized. Okay, it says, we further found that the 3 informants who obtained WFO's concurrence for each of the 3 to travel as required by FBI policy, none of these 3 were authorized by the FBI to engage in illegal activity, even though they did. So it's putting the onus back on them. Okay, it's putting it on them. So yeah, our informants broke the law, but it's their fault. And the other informants who broke the law, they weren't prosecuted. And then the 9 who didn't, who knows what the fuck they were doing. Anyway, this right here is your covering of the asses. Okay. And as you'll see, they released some shit highly redacted. Whatever this is, you see? Update for January 6th events. All right. So it's a true shit show here. It's a true shit show. Okay, so we have covered the Ray Epps and the FBI and the January 6th, okay? So now we're going to get to something else here, which is equally important. Just a moment. Let's see. This is in reference to another FBI shit show. Okay, and that other FBI shit show with informants is the Gretchen Whitmer false flag event. The kidnapping of the governor of Michigan, false flag event, made for television, just like January 6th. The following comes from the United States versus Caleb Franks. It's Caleb Franks' motion for disclosure of all records related to confidential human sources and memorandum in support. Okay, Caleb Franks moves for an order directing the government to disclose all records related to the recruiting of, use of, and interaction with the confidential human sources who participated in the investigation of this matter. In support of this motion, Mr. Franks offers this memorandum of law. Introduction. Caleb Franks is charged with conspiring to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. The government went forward with this charge despite knowing that Caleb told a number of people, including government informants, that he was not cool with offensive kidnapping, and added that he was just there for training. Now, please pay close attention to hear what we here in the red box. After hearing Caleb Frank's unambiguous declaration, these informants, commonly called confidential human sources, worked hard under the direction of the FBI handlers to induce and persuade him and others to engage in a plan to kidnap Governor Whitmer. The government has identified at least 12 informants by number. That's right. That's right. 12 informants. The majority of the kidnappers, or the alleged planned kidnappers of Gretchen Whitmer, were feds. That's right. The government has identified at least 12 confidential human sources by number. CHS 995252, CHS 97067, CHS 99802, CHS 99900, CHS 59197, CHS 62527, CHS 65724, CHS 36620, CHS 88802, CHS 99325, CHS 99691, and CHS 10614. The confidential informants were assisted by FBI agents working undercover. Do you understand that? 12 confidential informants assisted by unknown number of undercover FBI agents. The majority of individuals involved in this planned kidnapping for purposes of propaganda on television. Okay. Caleb never agreed to participate in a kidnapping plan and will defend the case at trial on that basis. Caleb is entitled to raise the alternative defense of entrapment. If a jury finds that Caleb agreed with anyone to kidnap Governor Whitmer, the same jury could find that Caleb was induced to participate by government agents. Caleb is entitled to fully explore and present this defense. To do this, Caleb needs access to the confidential human sources or confidential human source files maintained by the government. These files are required by the FBI and DOJ rules and will provide crucial information regarding entrapment issues that will not be available anywhere else. Caleb should not be required to engage in the hide and seek process that the FBI has applied to this case. This case began with the government filing a criminal complaint on October 6, 2020, charging Mr. Franks and 5 others with conspiring to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer in violation of 18 U.S. Code 1201C. Authorities arrested Mr. Franks the following day in Michigan. His initial appearance occurred on October 8, 2020. Remember, 12 informants, unknown number of undercovers, and 6 regular guys. The government indicated Mr. Franks and his co-defendants on December 16, 2022. Indicted Mr. Franks and his co-defendants on December 16, 2020. This indictment included a single charge, conspiracy to kidnap Governor Whitmer. Co-defendant Ty Garbin has pled guilty, with other defendants proceeding toward trial, which is scheduled to begin October 12, 2021. Minutes of Garbin change of plea. A superseding indictment filed April 28, 2021 added additional charges against co-defendants but did not modify the charge against Mr. Franks. Factual background: when Caleb Franks set out to train in weaponry and tactics, enjoy time outdoors, and spend a Midwestern summer trying to find respite from the cares of professional and personal obligations and demands, he had no thoughts of harassing the government, staging a coup, or ending up on the national stage as an alleged terrorist. Only through the diligent efforts of government informants and undercover agents did Mr. Franks end up framed as a lawless agitator. Mr. Franks, of course, cannot speak for the intentions of his co-defendants, but he believes that a number of them shared his approach to simply enjoying tactical training and camaraderie. Until this case, Mr. Franks essentially represented everything that the criminal justice system looks for in someone who has had trouble with the law. Once a heroin user, Mr. Franks went to jail in 2013, but this experience in custody shook him, and he turned his life around. Since that time, he has remained sober. After his successful completion of 2 years of drug court in the wake of his 9 months in jail, Mr. Franks began using his own past experiences as a background and turned to helping others who found themselves struggling with addiction. After years of sobriety and after establishing a successful career as a drug and alcohol counselor, Mr. Franks moved for and received expungement of his possession of cocaine conviction. He thus does not live with any sort of felon status. And besides moving beyond this drug-involved past, he has found a supportive fiancée, mended his relationship with his family, and purchased a home. When he participated in tactical firearm and first aid training with others, he did not see himself as varying from the steady law-abiding path he has so diligently paved for himself over the last several years. Mr. Franks will raise an entrapment defense at trial. He is thus entitled to the government's complete files on all confidential human sources used in this matter. Entrapment. Evidence in this case establishes that the government assiduously orchestrated creation of the alleged wrongdoing here, using undercover agents. Remember, an unknown number of undercover agents and 12, at least, confidential human sources to create the plot it now presents in this indictment. Only through the efforts of the confidential human sources, informants, and undercover agents did the government come up with the allegations here. That is classic entrapment. Okay. And we're going to read one more for you. What is this called? This is called, okay, got it. Okay, there we go. There we go. Now, this is the defendant's motion to dismiss the superseding indictment based on the government overreaching and misconduct and memorandum in support. Filed December 25th, 2021. The defendants in this matter, and these are all your defendants, who did not plead guilty. Okay, remember the one pled guilty. These 5 guys versus U.S. of A. The defendants in this matter, through their attorneys, move this court to dismiss the charges against them contained in the superseding indictment. In support of this motion, they offer the following memorandum of law. Essentially, the evidence here demonstrates egregious overreaching by the government's agents and by the informants those agents handled. The key to the government's plan was to turn general discontent with Governor Whitmer's COVID-19 restrictions into a crime that could be prosecuted for the purposes of being televised, I would add. The government picked what it knew would be a sensational charge: conspiracy to kidnap the governor, when the government was faced with the evidence showing that the defendants had no interest in a kidnapping plot. It refused to accept failure and continued to push its plan. Eventually, the government initiated this case, despite the fact that it knew there was no plan to kidnap. no operational plan, and no details about how a kidnapping would occur and what would happen afterward. The facts show that there was no conspiracy. In the alternative, because the government overreached and committed serious acts of misconduct against defendants who had repudiated the government's suggested wrongdoing, the defense can establish entrapment as a matter of law. Okay, the case began with the government filing a criminal complaint on October 6, 2020, which was explosive and exploded into all your mainstream media. What do we call it? Project Mockingbird media. I'm at a loss for words. Okay, this is your mind control. This is your mind control. This was your instilling of fear, paranoia, and it's no different from what happened with January 6th. Okay, same perpetrators, confidential informants, and federal agents instigating activities which could then be used to broadcast. Oh yeah, thank you, MK Ultra. This is your typical MK Ultra. It's your social engineering using mass media. Okay, Project Mockingbird media, MK Ultra, to traumatize and turn the people of the United States against a particular contingent using fear tactics like what you saw occur on January 6th, and this thing here, which is the alleged kidnapping conspiracy against a governor of a state of the United States. Typical entrapment, typical agent provocateurs, it's confidential informants, it's the feds lying at every turn in order to not be held accountable. Okay, it's using everything at their disposal, coming from both the government sector and from your media segment, in order to persuade the public that that's not what happened, that the false flag is what happened. Okay, but that is not what happened. What in reality, what has happened is the federal informants have provoked incidents, okay, to be able to use as political ammunition. This case begins with the government filing a criminal complaint charging the defendants with conspiracy to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. The Supreme Court has long held that government overreaching can constitute entrapment as a matter of law and can provide grounds for vacating a conviction. When it can be decided as a matter of law, the issue of whether a defendant has been entrapped may be decided by a judge. Courts in the Sixth Circuit have recognized these aspects of entrapment, discussing how entrapment is established as a matter of law when undisputed evidence demonstrates government agents engaged in conduct which overbore an innocent person's will and induced them to commit an offense. We're going to go into the Capitol. I orchestrated it. Entrapment is generally a jury question. However, the court may find the defendant entrapped as a matter of law where the undisputed evidence taken in the light most favorable to the government demonstrates a patently clear absence of predisposition. In making the relevant inquiries, a court should not choose between conflicting witnesses nor judge credibility. It should reach its conclusions from the evidence, like undisputed testimony of the prosecution's witnesses. In this case, the undisputed evidence, as demonstrated in 44 pages of statements already submitted to the court, establishes that the government agents and informants concocted, hatched, and pushed this kidnapping plan from the beginning, doing so against defendants who explicitly repudiated the plan. Bet you didn't know that, because MSNBC won't tell you. In Jacobson, the court considered the circumstances of the defendant who had endured 2.5 years of repeated efforts by 2 government agencies through 5 fictitious organizations and a bogus pen pal to explore petitioners' willingness to break the new law by ordering sexually explicit photographs of children through the mail. Government agents sent that defendant materials related to hedonism, sexual interest surveys, and materials related to fictitious organizations supposedly advocating for sexual liberty. In that case, although the defendant had responded to surveys and letters, the government had no evidence that he ever intentionally possessed or been exposed to child pornography. The Postal Service had not checked his mail to determine whether he was receiving questionable mailings from persons other than the government involved in the child pornography industry. Ultimately, after the government's protracted efforts, the Postal Service agents sent the defendant a solicitation about child pornography, and the defendant ordered a Boys Who Loves Boys magazine containing child pornography. Once he made that order, the government descended on him, searched his home, found the magazine, indicted him on child pornography charges. At trial, the district court did instruct the jury on the defendant's entrapment defense, but the jury convicted him anyway. And a divided Eighth Circuit, sitting in blank, affirmed, concluding that the defendant had not been entrapped as a matter of law. Yet the Supreme Court saw things differently. In considering the case, the court acknowledged that, quote, there can be no dispute that the government may use undercover agents to enforce law, and government agents may, quote, use artifice and stratagem to apprehend those engaged in criminal enterprises. In their zeal to enforce the law, however, government agents may not originate a criminal design, implant an innocent person's mind with the disposition to commit a criminal act, and then induce the commission of the crime so that the government may then prosecute. The court in Jacobson made some key observations for purposes of the case at hand. In Jacobson, by the time the defendant finally placed his order, he had already been the target of 26 months of repeated mailings and communications from government agents and fictitious organizations. So although he had become predisposed to break the law by May 1987, it was the court's view that the government did not prove that this predisposition was independent and not a product of the attention that the government had directed. Sorry, I had a little sneeze. When the government's quest for convictions leads to the apprehension of an otherwise law-abiding citizen who, if left to his own devices, likely would have never run afoul of law, the court should intervene. Even the dissent in Jacobson would frown upon the government's conduct here. In her dissent in the former case, Justice O'Connor emphasized that Jacobson defendant had no need or needed no government agent to coax, threaten, or persuade him. No one played on his sympathies, friendship, or suggested that committing this crime would further a greater good. In fact, no government agent even contacted him face to face. Okay. In the case at hand, in sharp contrast, informants, of course, not only contacted the defendants face to face, but also coaxed, persuaded, cajoled, played on the sympathies, cultivated friendships, took advantage of the defendant's financial conditions, and suggested that the offense they proposed would further a greater good. The defendants did not engage in any activity for profit. Anything they did with respect to informants was based on friendship and admiration and the informant's assiduous cultivation of a sense of patriotism and right doing. In looking at other cases, the Jacobson dissent cited decisions where courts pointed to defendants' evidence reluctance to engage in criminal activity, and the government overcoming that reluctance through repeated inducement as the most important factor. Unsurprisingly, the Jacobson court reviewed earlier decisions to support its conclusion. One such preceding opinion being Sherman versus U.S. In Sherman, a government informer met the defendant at the doctor's office as someone who, like the defendant, was being treated for drug addiction. Several chance meetings followed, chance, quote unquote, followed either at the doctor's office or at the pharmacy where both men filled their prescriptions from the doctor. From mere greetings, conversations progressed to a discussion of mutual experiences and problems, including their attempts to overcome addiction to or narcotics. Finally, the informant asked the defendant if the defendant knew of good drug source. He asked the defendant to supply him with the source because he was not responding to the treatment. From the beginning, the defendant had tried to avoid the issue, and not until after a number of repetitions of the request predicated on the presumed suffering of the informant did the defendant finally acquiesce. Statements like those explored in the instant defendant's motion allowed introduction of out-of-court statements demonstrate on the motion to allow the introduction of out-of-court statements to demonstrate the congruence of the instant case with Sherman and Jacobson. On June 6, 2020, a confidential informant admonished, quote, "You can't just grab brick and mortar without a effing human to go with it. You've done nothing but grab brick and mortar." No one had broached the idea of kidnapping. The government informant raised the idea. The Sixth Circuit found entrapment as a matter of law in U.S. versus McLernan, which parallels this case in many respects. The McLernan court presented certain factors relevant to determining a defendant's prior disposition, including 1, the character or reputation of the defendant, including a relevant prior criminal record, 2, whether the government made the initial suggestion to engage in criminal activity, and 3, whether the defendant engaged in criminal activity for profit, and 4, whether the defendant evidenced reluctance to commit the offense overcome only by repeated government inducement or persuasion, and 5, the nature of the inducement persuasion provided by the government. These factors all point toward entrapment as a matter of law in this case. Regarding the initial suggestion of wrongdoing and an expression of reluctance on July 7, 2020, multiple defendants and others were together when someone apparently raised the subject of kidnapping. And someone in the group immediately said that they were not cool with offensive kidnapping, while others, including defendants Franks and Harris, echoed this sentiment. This incident shows that there was no predisposition to kidnap Governor Whitmer or anyone else. On July 18, 2020, at a national militia meeting held by the government, Ty Garbin rebuffed an informant's suggestion of kidnapping of a public official. Garbin said, "So I think an objective to go for is not the kidnapping." 3 weeks later, on August 9, 2020, defendant Harris told the lead informant and others, "No snatch and grab, I swear to effing God." Garbin even seconded Mr. Harris's repudiation of the notion of kidnapping when he stated, "Kidnapping is just as bad as going into the Capitol." Do I need to repeat that for you idiots in the fucking back? Kidnapping is just as bad as going into the Capitol, he said. Even FBI Special Agent Impola has testified regarding August 9th, confirming that the defendants reacted negatively to the idea of kidnapping. Question, can we call it that? All right. And what's the reaction of the group when Adam Fox talks about this idea? Answer, well, there was a negative reaction. People were surprised. They didn't take to it kindly. There was a lot of questions being asked. Okay. After that meeting, on August 9, 2020, Special Agents Chambers and Impola participated in a phone call with informants Dan and Adam Fox. Informant Dan, right. What you think about with everybody where they're at. Fox, definitely divided. Dan, like you planned it all. Fox, I mean, we're divided. These defendants had no desire whatsoever to kidnap anyone. Yet the government wouldn't drop the fucking idea, and the informants continued to broach plans despite official government admonitions barring the suggestion of such plans. Phone calls like the one above represent a mere appetizer. The informant's handlers pulled the puppet strings the entire time. On August 28th, informant Dan asked Special Agent Chambers, "Would you want 2 trips or wait till we get more guys?" as part of his attempt to get it right for the government. In state court, Special Agent Impola affirmed his direct role in telling informants what to say to people. He told an informant what to say to Adam Fox. he was communicating with the informant during the informant's conversations with Fox. His directions included suggesting that Fox come train at Joe Morrison's property and urging Fox to do so. Interestingly, given Special Agent Chambers' role in directing activities here and in a company that tweeted about the investigation as explored in earlier filings on October 29, 2021, Special Agent Chambers dissolved the company, filing papers with New Mexico Secretary of State discussing Chambers' interest in an intelligence company tweeting about the investigation. The timing seems more than coincidental, given the issues raised in this case were also presented in the media. The commercial behavior only compounds the overreaching and emotional manipulation and the government's strategic planning that ultimately came up short. It bears noting, in an analogous context involving one agent's prior coercive schemes, the Sixth Circuit has said evidence related to an agent's motivations or tactics is admissible, and that trial courts abuse their discretion in excluding it. The defendants never agreed to the government's kidnapping plan, a repudiation even the government implicitly recognizes. In response to the defendants' rejection of the plot, government agents prompted informant Dan to propose alternatives, less violent property crimes, which have been previously identified to the court. The government and the informants proposed these ideas in an effort to hang something onto these gentlemen to justify their work. For example, the government suggested the idea of firing rounds into the governor's cottage and sending shell casings to her. Notably, the government's actors made the first effort to find the address of the cottage. The defendants put so little thought into the idea of kidnapping the governor on September 13, 2020, when the FBI and the informants and the defendants reached Elk Rapids in the late evening hours. They failed to find the cottage because they had the wrong address. That incorrect address was provided by Special Agent Chambers at 10:14 p.m. as people were making their way from Cadillac to Elk Rapids. Special Agent Chambers provided a street number beginning with 7 and ending in 5, when the actual number began in 6 and ended in 5. Okay, the government's ride-along itinerary was lost to this error. Apparently, the FBI and the informants had planned to drive their targets to the governor's cottage so these targets could be captured on the poll cam that had been installed for the purpose of filming them arriving. You get it? None of those targets knew that the government intended to have them actually go to the cottage as part of the ride-along or enter upon the governor's private property. The government conceived and controlled every aspect of this alleged plot. On September 5th, 2020, FBI Special Agent Jason Chambers texted informant Dan, "Mission is to kill the governor specifically." Look at it. Look at it. That's FBI Special Agent Jason Chambers texting informant Dan, "Mission is to kill the governor specifically." Three months after the government proposed kidnapping, and 2 months after the defendant's strident repudiation of the idea, and a month after the defendant's reiteration of their repudiation, the government's agents continued to push to shape a kidnapping plan, even trying to elevate it to murder. With regard to inducement and persuasion, the government's emotional manipulation abounded. Its approach was persistent and emotional from the outset. Agents and informants used ties related to friendship, being role models, and acting as father figures to develop trust and reliance in the defendants. You see what's going on here? The informants used military veterans as informants, and having these people pose as patriotic Americans concerned with preserving the principles enshrined in the Constitution. Examples of these emotional tactics are everywhere in this case. On June 22nd, 2020, an undercover government employee text Adam Fox, "Hey brother, this is Mark using my girlfriend's account. Elise was talking to your fiance Amanda about getting more involved, and Amanda suggested I contact you. Okay. The government manufactured ties to loved ones like his fiance to gain acceptance and trust within the group. On September 30th, 2020, informant Dan told Adam Fox that Dan could not afford food or medical care, citing an inability to purchase a pizza that cost less than $6. While Dan received tens of thousands of dollars for his cooperation with the government as an informant, sometimes the envelope filled with cash, in envelopes filled with cash, he fostered a bond with the defendants by claiming poverty and deprivation. Dan used his untreated hernia as a device to gain sympathy with Fox and others. He claimed that the veterans or the VA, Veterans Administration, would not provide him proper treatment after years of combat service in the Army. You see the emotional manipulation they're doing. This is entrapment. This is classic entrapment. Feeling the emotional pull of such a confession that Dan would tell Adam Fox he was waiting to die because of this. Fox told Dan that he needed to get surgical treatment as a priority over any mission plans. The government coordinated and brought unrelated participants, unknown to one another, together for meetings where the government actors would attempt to radicalize them. The meetings at Dublin and Peebles, Ohio, provided examples as touched on above. An informant first raised the scepter of kidnapping at the Dublin meeting. At the National Militia meeting in Peebles, this informant attempted to motivate the targets into anger with a rousing speech featuring Antifa, mask mandates, and similar topics. For example, and this right here, this is why the F I'm telling you, it's being allowed by DeWine here. Effing S-face, Whitface, or whatever her name is there. Blackface effing there. Why are they not returning the same measure that we are being given? Why are we giving quarter when no quarter is being given? MRFers are going to throw shit at us. Why aren't we throwing shit back? Why are we not effing? This is what I'm saying. I agree with you 100%. This has to happen. I agree with you 100% with you guys. That shit has to happen. Because if not, this shit right here is going to continue to kill us in our back effing yards. Okay? This is an informant trying to incite these guys. Efforts like these at national meetings came from multiple informants and FBI agents who coordinated. This is incitement. Their work with meetings to create an atmosphere of crisis and impending social unrest, all in an effort to motivate targets to work with informant Dan and join him in his plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer. Informant Dan and his handlers' efforts to coordinate a group of to initiate his attack planning did not bear fruit, however, despite the government's investment of time, money, manipulation, and resources. On September 3rd, 2020, Adam Fox responded to informant Dan's inquiry as to the informant's proposal about acting on the governor at Elk Rapids. Fox replied, "No, let's keep that to us, but throw out maybe taking the cap or gunning down Antifa or even say arresting the governor, maybe even charging politicians, that we can float the idea of cops enforcing constitutional law." So you see what he's doing? He said, I ain't doing none of that shit. Let's just say the cops should enforce constitutional laws. Continuing in this vein, he sent this message to informant Dan. Listen to our main direction at the moment. Our main direction is to prepare for possible bug out plan. Ty wanted to do, we need to have that in line set up, make sure everyone's prospective families are safe. Then we have our assault. In a telephone conversation, Fox said, listen, this is what I want to do for now. Like, I want to do everything we talked about. I really do. I want to effing follow up on the order. But for now, we've got to do ghost on it right now. We can't talk about it. We can't. It's ixnay on the plan, eek. Well, even like all our guys, I would put her on the back burner in their minds, okay? See, he's saying don't do it. Fox continued to repudiate Dan's plans because it's not until next effing spring or effing summer, okay? We know we can't do that until then. Let's put this on the back burner for now. Let's focus on something more tangible for the coming future and everything. What we should do is go with Ty and his bug out plan. Adam Fox's priority on September 2020 was to be prepared for what he believed would be a social crisis at the time of the election, and to have a plan to retreat to a secure location so that those involved and their families would have a place to go that would be safe and removed from any impending social unrest that could occur. Bug out. Simply, the government pushed its agenda, ignoring the disapproval of the defendants and their lack of support for the government's suggestions. The government sponsored, coordinated, and produced trainings such as the one in Cambria, Wisconsin. A June 22nd, 2020 announcement on Facebook, posted by an informant, proclaimed an FTX cross-train multi-state. The event would include medical, live fire range, kill house with breach and entry shack, close quarters weapons protection. If time, knife hand-to-hand, lunch and dinner, Saturday, Sunday, breakfast, lunch will be provided. We are family, community-oriented organization. Kids are welcome. We have a huge pool, activities for them, and daycare on site. Guns up, long live the Republic, or you can come the night before. If you set up camp, drive down early, blah, 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 blah. See what they're doing? It's honey trapping. They're honey trapping these otherwise normal, kind of conservative American men who are concerned about social unrest. They're honey trapping them into extremism. While the defendant could not afford to travel, Dan made it easy for them. He paid the entire trip. He drove, paid gas and tolls. He paid for rooms and meals. At the direction of agents, he set out to get the defendants to this meeting. Honey trapping. Okay? These informants provided all of the military-style training for that weekend in Wisconsin. These trainings helped the government succeed in its aim to make the defendants look up to and admire them. Okay? No one questions that the function of law enforcement is the prevention of crime and the apprehension of criminals. Manifestly, that function does not include the manufacturing of crime. While criminal activity may require stealth and strategy to appear in an investigation when necessary as weapons in the arsenal of the police officer, a different question presents itself when the criminal design originates with the officials of the government or FBI agents or confidential criminal informants. And they implant this in the mind of innocent persons and the disposition to commit alleged offenses and induce their commission in order that they may then prosecute. In such circumstances, stealth and strategy become objectionable police methods as coerced as the confession and the unlawful search. Okay. Congress could not have intended that its statutes were to be enforced by tempting innocent persons into violations of law. Nor are the defendants asking the court to rule based only on the government's overreaching here. Given the long list of statements the defense has already provided to the court, showing a lack of predisposition on the part of defendants, and the government's concentrated, assiduous efforts to initiate a scheme and offense, one can hardly say that this investigation did not involve creative activity on the part of the government. Okay. The Sixth Circuit has been clear. No conviction may be held against one who was induced by the government to commit a crime unless the government proves beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant was predisposed to commit this crime. The government cannot disown its informants' actions and their dogged efforts to overcome this lack of predisposition. Although he was not being paid, Sherman, or the informant, was an active government informer who had but recently been the instigator of at least 2 other prosecutions. Here in this case, of course, the special agent Impola has testified to in state court. Informant Dan, for one, earned over $50,000 for his work as an informant. Interestingly, courts willing to grant motions similar to this one have done so even when the defendant was never ready to do the deal today, but still suggested he would do it tomorrow or at some later time. As in Odesh, Jacobson, and Sherman, the defendants in this case exhibited a patently clear absence of predisposition to commit criminal acts charged. The defendants thus asked the court to find entrapment as a matter of law and dismiss the case. Okay. Okay, so it's frustrating that because I'm not speaking Delphi, no one's here to hear it. But it doesn't matter because you fucks are obsessed with Delphi. So let's talk about Delphi, okay? You've just heard all of that, right? Here's a question for you. Were there federal FBI informants working in Delphi at the time of the murders of Abby and Libby? Okay, you want to talk about Delphi? There are repeated allegations that there was militia training going on over there, especially along the Mears Bottoms. There are allegations that there were informants involved in the situation that led to the murders of Abby and Libby. What is the likelihood, or at a minimum, what is the possibility that there may have been federal informants working down on the ground, boots on the ground, in the day and the days leading up to the deaths of Abby and Libby in Delphi? Were we only dealing with local informants? Derek German, possibly. Garrett Kurtz, possibly. Were we possibly dealing with federal informants? Was there some sort of situation going on with the informants and the law enforcement and the meth dealers? Is that why there's been the most extensive cover-up that you've ever seen in your life on this double murder of 2 little girls? Is it like Eric Williams says, that it was cops and criminal informants and the girls walked into it and they ended up dead? The enormity of this cover-up would make a whole lot more sense if you had a couple federal informants, boots on the ground. Wake-up call for you. Whether you like it or not, there's a political sea change that's coming to the FBI. in January. That's next month. The days of Merrick Garland, Christopher Wray, and others getting up there and lying to your face about what is clear and obvious and concerning. Those days are coming to an end. Whether you like it or not. Hopefully, all that we just read or heard, hopefully those days are coming to an end. Those were all political operations. The courts should not be the venues of political operations. Federal law enforcement should not be a tool of political operations. You see, what I'd like to see is that the truth about Delphi come to the surface, no matter what it means. Federal informants, local informants, cops, family, or not. So, it's interesting because the truth has still not been told about Ray Epps, about January 6th, about Whitmer, and about Delphi. So let's have it. Let's have it. 26 informants at January 6th. I mean, that's a large number. How many undercover feds? How many undercover? $12 plus CIs in Michigan? How many undercover? You see, you're dealing with dozens in each of these situations. It's possible that Delphi involved several. And if that's the case, you would always cover it up. If you have two little girls killed in the midst of a situation that involved local and or federal informants and law enforcement, it would be bad. It would demand the enormity of a cover-up similar to that which it appears is happening in Delphi. Remember, we've asked these questions. How could they? How could they be so obvious? Everyone says, how? You know how many people that would take? Yes, I do. I do. I've always asked the question, what could be that big? Maybe this could be that big. And hey, if you don't like it, it's okay. Go home. Let it marinate. Let it marinate. You might like it. If you like the truth, might not be that pill you want to swallow. But that is what it is. So that was our Ray Epps and the FBI's Confidential Criminal Informants show. I hope that all of you give some consideration to some of what I've said tonight. It's not pleasant to think about. I mean, feds are supposed to be there to protect and serve, protect us, right? That's the ideal, anyway. Anyway, I'd like to ask you to please support the channel. Cash App, I think, is pinned in the chat. Please send the Cash App if you'd like to support via Cash App or buy me a coffee. Please, there's also super chats, hit the like, etc. I'd like to especially thank Ashes to Ashes for renewing her membership, Heather Brown for $1.99 super chat, and Jake Brooks for a $9.99 super chat. Thank you, Jake Brooks. Anyone who is on the replay, please be aware you can support the channel and also leave a comment down below, because the comments down below do support the channel. In that it keeps us talking. Okay, talking is good. Talking is very good. So yeah, that was pretty serious, and it's not my favorite thing to discuss, but I felt it needed to be done, especially with the recent news that we had 26 informants at a minimum, January 6th. But we've known that all along. It's just they're beginning to admit that something in that direction happened. Okay, but only 3 or 4 went in. Anyway, and hey, people are people. So there are definitely some good people in the FBI, don't get me wrong. Here and there, sprinkled throughout your local field offices, there's some good people. But we haven't liked what we've seen. Okay, we haven't liked it. So what happened to Delphi? Why is it being covered up? What else would I like to say? I have a question for you. Before we go, I'm not going to make a big deal out of it. But who are these guys? Who are these guys? Well, yeah. God bless. See you guys later.